This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, Joey asks me about desire paths.
Woo!
1000001. This is what a Joey sounds like. And this is what an executive producer and bushwhacker Jess Vander sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess. Rude?
Rude? I don't think it's rude. Bushwhackers, one of the best tag team wrestling teams of the WWF in the late 80s and early 90s.
Just clearing the gardens.
I was doing the bushwhacker arm move, which you can't see because this is coming in your ear holes. Jessica.
Yeah.
Can we talk about elephants and or desire and paths?
Go on.
Sometimes called elephant paths, I believe. Sometimes called desire paths. I think they probably have like a handful of different names. I think we've individually talked about this to each other like in past, not on a show, but I came across this image online, just like a cartoon of like, there's a path and that it's like a progressive things happening. All of a sudden, slowly a path cuts off to the side that is not like the paved path.
Like a sidewalk.
Yeah, like through a park or something.
Yeah.
There's like a straight path and then like people start walking on the grass and forming a path off to the side. So they try to put a bench in front of it and then they like plant a hedge and people are just sort of like going around. And it's sort of this image to indicate this idea of desire paths. And there's lots of fun examples of colleges like building quads but not paving anything and letting students like walk across the grass and then just paving where the lines were because it's like, okay, this path has already formed. And it creates these like cool sort of like starbursts of walkways that don't necessarily make sense ostensibly if you look at them, but have been demonstrated through human behavior to be like, actually, this is where the paths go. And I was thinking about when seeing that image, like, okay, cool. We've learned this lesson seemingly in like
In sidewalks.
in like park
Right.
planning and like walkable areas. To more or less, like sometimes we clearly have not learned that lesson.
Yes.
But I was wondering about where are there other places where this idea of desire paths would be relevant when not talking about sidewalks?
I love this. Because I've always been obsessed with this idea of desired paths. It also, like, as soon as you asked that, the first thing that I thought was, well, where else do we have grass, right? Because when you're, say, on your phone, like there are so many worlds in which it would be amazing to have an app more, designed for users or where people expect to find something. But if you don't have a built-in method to see where people would go, you don't have the grass, you don't have the snow tracks, how do you figure out where people wanted to be in the first place? How do you figure out their intention or their preference if you don't give them, or there isn't built-in space for them to work around it? And probably worst case, just get used to a worse thing.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think the principle of desire paths is, hey, if we were able to give you sort of like a blank slate left to your own devices, what would your preference be? And then build off of that. But sometimes we force people to work around something, especially digitally, that eventually you're just like, oh, I guess, I know that I have to click 3 times into here and then swipe up and it's at the bottom, weirdly named in this section.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like in digital experiences, there are instances where like friction is important or relevant, even if annoying, right? Like a simple example is if I go on my bank app and I try to like send someone money via Zelle, I have to hit a ton of buttons.
They're like, pay it? Are you sure?
But it's like,
Are
did you
ready?
press the right numbers?
Yep.
Did you mean 30 or 300?
Right.
And it's like the number of times, like I can just hammer the button enough times and be like, okay, I'm not actually going to pay attention. But the idea is just like 300, 300. Did you really mean 300? In case you meant 30, because it's going to be a pain in the ass if you didn't mean it. Is like one example of a small friction that is there intentionally. But then in the park example, like, is it intentional or not, right? Like the park is meant to be enjoyed for leisure, but it is also meant to be aesthetic in some capacity, right? And so, but clearly people are like, the efficiency of a straight line is far better for where I'm heading than I'm willing to sacrifice the aesthetic in this example, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other classic example, which we definitely have talked about at some point, and I learned about in college, but like the layout of grocery stores. Why is it that every grocery store looks exactly the same, where you walk in and right from the entrance is like the produce aisle, around looping around the back is probably meat counters, or maybe it's not the deli, it's actually more of just like meat and fish. And in the farthest possible place is the dairy. Milk and eggs are always the farthest possible place. And then in sort of like the main area are going to be all the rows, starting in with more of like the true, like maybe it's like the health goods, or maybe it's like specialty, like maybe you have like a kosher aisle up closer to the produce, but then in the middle you get like true pantry. That's where breads, cereals, jams, whatever go. And then at the farther side is where frozen stuff is. Like all of you picturing this with me, like, you know, this grocery store, it's almost everyone you've ever been to. And if you've gone into a grocery store that is not laid out like this, it is so bewildering. You're like, I don't even, like, where am I going? Where do I find anything?
But it's the anti-desire path.
But it's exactly one of those things of like, well, the reason that they've put the loss leader, something like milk that they know that you need to get and you're going to trudge through the store to find, they want you to pass by all these other things first. It's the same reason that IKEA is laid out, where you go on this winding maze labyrinth and then you actually buy all the things at the very end after you've done this sort of wandering, walking the flaneur type stroll through the gardens of IKEA. And all of those are right. These are all like the bad things. So maybe it's, or maybe not bad. It's just, it is understanding how to force against the desire paths. It's the putting of the hedge right in the way.
Literal walls in the case of IKEA. I'm like, I'm trying to take all of the shortcuts. Like I've been twice where I'm like, I have to get a replacement bracket or something like that.
Right.
And you're like, it is going to take me 15 minutes to get to the place because they won't let me access the reverse.
Right.
entrance.
You have to go through the unnamed warehouse door on the bottom floor next to the elevators, only if you know it, with no handle. So you need to like catch it when someone's walking out. Or you do like, you attempt to do the shortcut through the upstairs where they're like, this is a shortcut to the mattress section. And you're like, that is still only a quarter of the way through, but I guess it's better than walking through the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting, and like looking for desire paths in your life and then making a call of like, do you need to be putting up the walls and intentional friction, or do you need to just be paving the lines that people are trotting, and like where that is? Because I think we experience them in a lot of places. We just may not recognize them in the way that we would like a literal path.
Right, because it's a proper design exercise, right? Like you need to be paying attention to people's behavior or your own behavior, and that is really hard to do. That's why there are people who do this. That's why we do this for our jobs, right? But it reminds me, there was a TikTok that I saw secondhand because I am strange. So actually where I found it, I don't know. But anyway, the TikTok was about this sort of like interior decorator planner type person who was saying like, hey, do you find that like you leave a bunch of your stuff out in various places, or you don't put your coat away in the coat closet or whatever? It's probably a sign that your space is not working for you. Or if you find like you leave trash out in various places, like put a bunch of little trash cans everywhere. And I was like, well, I guess that could help you put the trash in the trash the first time. Like in a city, if you have more trash cans, then people might put trash in those trash cans. But you still need to eventually empty those trash cans. And if you have 40 personal trash cans in your
yeah,
house.
yeah,
At some point, it's going to catch up to you versus, say, the simple system of walking through a park. It doesn't have that many ripple effects.
yeah.
But it is interesting to think about how in your own personal life, even if you identify a challenge, you might not be willing to accept whatever consequences of a smaller fix or a quicker fix might offer.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that is interesting from having worked with an organizer recently for our office and just sort of seeing the way that they think about things like that. Like I mean, even in my own home, my wife is always like, "Why do you hang your coat on the doorknob to the coat closet?" And I'm like, "Because I have to go in and out so
Right.
many times and it's a pain to hang it up because our coat closet is full. Can we just get a coat rack?" And she's like, "I don't want a coat rack.
Right.
I don't feel like there's somewhere naturally to put it where it would look good." I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna keep hanging my coat on this doorknob." But there's really classic examples in work, right? Like a CFO is like, "Please fill out your timesheets," and everyone's like, "I'm not filling out my timesheets," and it's a necessary thing. And so the ways in which people have historically approached it, especially in like really big companies, was like, if you haven't done your timesheets, your computer is going to like do a freeze out button you have to click every 15 minutes or something like that until you're like caught up to some threshold on your timesheets. And it's like this system that I don't know what the desire path is. People don't do timesheets. And I think as a result of it, companies have started to shift and like try to find ways where it is not as vital, even in professional services work where you're billing on your time. But like the desire path is like, I don't want to do this.
It's maybe what's interesting here is first diagnosing, like, is it an example where, like, I think we've discussed the idea of a Norman door, a door that is designed in such a way that is ambiguous or like confusing, like it is a pull door but with a push bar, and so it's not obvious which way or which side of the door you're supposed to pull it open. But if you design it a certain way, okay, fixed. It was actually more a confusion than anything versus a true desire path. That's something where you are trying to push away from or re-incentivize or disincentivize something that is truly like what it wants to be. That's just what it wants. And the idea of diagnosing, is this because people are confused, or is it because you think that they're like, based on what tools you have available to you, that people are wrong and that they need to change their natural course of behavior? It is funny, like, it reminds me for some reason of what I learned when going to CERN last summer to learn about colliding particles. And when they were ultimately trying to build the track to do it, they were like, well, if we're going to collide particles and get them to go really fast before they hit each other, we only have a couple of options of how we're going to do that. We either have to build a track that is super, super big in a circle so that they, like, their path, we can curve them really easily, or we need to get stronger magnets to help do the curving. And they were like, well, we don't have stronger magnets, so we're like the only option is to build this huge, build a bigger track is the only other option. But it's interesting, like, are there moments of desire paths where we think, oh, we need to disincentivize whatever this given behavior is because we have no other option? It's like, or do we? Maybe there is another option, you just haven't thought of it, and instead you're pushing against what the will of the people really is.
Yeah I mean, it is interesting thinking about incentives in the context of a desire path. Like, it is an example of something that someone can calculate very quickly visually, the incentive that they're going to get. Like, they're often created just because it's faster, right? Like, I will save 5 to 10 seconds maybe, but you can see, like, if I walk to the end of that path and take a right angle to get where I'm going, or if I just go diagonally, it will be faster. Like, people intuitively are calculating the hypotenuse and just walking along the hypotenuse. And a lot of systems that we operate in, there are probably actually like false desire paths, like where there's a desire path that is worn that is not like leading to the outcome that people are hoping to approach just because of the complexity of whatever system it is
It actually
operating
leads.
in.
The people who took that path had something else in mind,
Yeah,
but
there's
that
a
could
pit
confuse
at the
people.
end of the path.
Yeah. Pew!
Yeah. I mean, you were saying like before we started recording about like the idea of like, is a rule, desire paths are a way of thinking about like, is a rule a good rule or is a rule broken, right? Like
Yes, exactly.
the idea of, do I build a hedge and a bench and a garbage can that I'm trying to put in the way so someone goes on the path that I want them to, versus like bending towards the will, like some amount of friction for you, but getting what you need, versus trying to create like, I mean, maybe it is just volume of friction, right? Like
Yes.
if you have a bunch of people who want one thing and an individual who wants something else, it is going to long term be more efficient just to bend to the group in that instance.
Yes, I'm sure there's a real name for this, but this idea of like a desire path threshold of like, there comes a time at which, I mean, parents everywhere know this, where you just give up because it isn't worth it, right? Your kid is so intent on doing this thing. The people are so intent on walking that path. And it's like, are you sure it matters that much to you that people take this other path? Because maybe you should just give it to them. Maybe you should just let them have this, and it's a good idea. I feel like the other piece of it is like, what are you? It forces you to, whatever that threshold is, forces you to revisit your own motivation for the original thing. And I feel like way too often it's either a misguided idea of what people will want, or, and this is what's really tricky and like the distinction between, I think many would agree, good and bad design is, what do people really need versus what is beautiful. Like, I was just having a conversation with a friend this last week about, someone that they know, their first foray into being an architect, and how tricky it is when you're trying to express your artistic expression, you're trying to make it so nice, and it's like, yeah, but also if this doesn't work for people, is that doing its job? Maybe we must lend an ear to what practicality is screaming in your face, and readjust and recalibrate what is actually good design.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, the whole conversation has made me start to think about, I don't know, like work processes and collaboration and all of these other things of like, hey, we need this for a process. And it's like, well, do you need that? Like, what do you really need? And being like, when are you deploying? I mean, I think deploying intentional friction is like, try to do it as minimally as possible, but like in some instances, like put up the hedgerow, I guess. But then otherwise it's like, how do you shift the process to bend to some desire path?
Right. And I think this is a conversation I was having with one of our colleagues the other day, which is, grass might look different in a workplace. For us, maybe it's, if people keep breaking that template that you built, what are the 3 most common reasons they're breaking it? And do they follow a pattern where it's like, oh, it's clearly because it doesn't fit on this page, or it's way too little for this page, or, trying to figure out like, I can start to observe our version of grass, which is sort of the sort of makeshift or the sub-in substitutions that people make. That's a sign maybe that it wants to be different.
Yeah. I mean, I think the pricing sheet, like we have a pricing sheet in Google Sheets, and like people like to break the programming that's in it. It will still function, but then they accidentally were going into the template and like breaking it there and never fixing it, so that the next person who came was like, hey, why isn't the
it doing
pricing
this?
sheet? So it's just like, that was an example of just like create the friction. Everyone knows how to use it. They're using it on their own desire path individually, but just like make sure the sort of foundational object can't be broken, and then everyone goes off in their own direction to make it work for them. And you're not saying like, well, you edited this you know, equation or something like that. It's like,
Yes.
okay, cool.
Yeah, it's interesting that how those two different pieces we talked about earlier of like, if you're confused about something versus if you aren't motivated to do something, how those can also intertwine with each other of like, you get so confused that it also impacts then your next move, and or worsens whatever you were intending to do. Now you break the whole door down because you couldn't figure out how to use it. And that's same with the pricing sheet. If it's like, oh, I clicked this wrong button, I didn't know that I did, but it's not working for me, so I ended up doing this whole other thing. You might be able to, I think this is the point, like fend off some of those incentives issues if you fix some of the simpler confusion ones first. But if the signs are written on the wall, it might ultimately just be a bigger incentives issue.
There's also interesting examples of like collaborative desire paths, right? Like in thinking about like in shopping districts or things like that, or where people have tried to establish shopping districts in neighborhoods or cities.
Yes.
But like, if you know that the butcher and the fishmonger and the baker are next to each other, they sort of maybe in that instance as three elevate themselves enough to become a desire path. But if you have like the butcher that is very far from the fishmonger and the baker, like then all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm probably not going to go to any of them because it's too many trips, or I'll use it in like special exceptions. Like that idea of within a sort of stochastic system that is like retail, like small business retail, like how do you establish? And sometimes you have like these examples where it's like it's starting to build up. Seems to be working, and there's like a travel agent sitting in like the middle that like doesn't seem to be doing business, has been there for 50 years, and is like, my rent is nothing, and I just come here because I don't want to stay at home all day or whatever. You know, like it can't quite get past that threshold to like establish a desire path, you know?
Yeah. And then some things are so painfully obvious seeming, like, yeah, if you put an ice cream shop a block away from the park, summertime, the kids roll through one after another, lining up. It makes perfect sense. A few of our coworkers were just talking about because they live in Jersey City, we're talking about how there's a new bagel place that opened in Jersey City with lines around the block because somehow no one thought, hey, maybe people in Jersey also like bagels, not just people in the city. And it's like, yeah, of course. Like when you finally put the missing piece in, what a glorious realization it is to be like, we've been waiting for this so long. If only someone did something about it.
Yeah. Or putting things around a subway station, or like there's sometimes you're like, oh, this has all the things I need when I'm getting off the subway, or there's nothing here. There's so many people coming in and out. Yeah. Well, Jess, can you take us to our wrap-up corner that has like a perfect path leading right up to it?
Just straight to it. Just right to the point. That's stupid. Desire paths, a thing that is more of a symptom of people's wants, maximizing tendencies, efficiency seeking, can also get mired in where we are intentionally trying to create frictions where we actually have been making something confusing that need not be quite confusing, where we're actually thinking that we're motivated to really force against that desire, and ultimately it doesn't even matter as much. In time we change our minds. Desire paths, if nothing else, start a conversation of how we can start listening better to other people and questioning maybe something's wrong with this. We should do something about it.
Mm-hmm. You can't design paths the way someone's going to use what you designed.
Yeah, or let them break it and adjust accordingly.
Nailed it. Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Brought to you by Walking in a Winter Wonderland.
As always, we'd like to thank our executive producer and trail post, Jess Vander. I don't know.
Thanks. we like to thank our sound engineer and guy who makes everything better, Alex Contel.
We'd like to thank our programming coordinator and the man who smooths out the game trails, Les Jacobs.
And thanks to our production crew and chock full of better ideas, Sarah Gilbert, Nora Mestrich, Amanda Medina, Christy Jensen, and Amy Waters.
And as always, thanks, Ellen. Special thanks to Game Trails.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Trails, generally.
Paths.
A vestige of what has happened. An artifact of time past and moments experienced.
Furrowed lawns.
Wow. Furrowed brows.
It's a type of path wherein my emotions are channeled.
And over time, it reflects in the furrows of your face. Wrinkles and all.
I want to say special thanks to my friend who sent a haiku to me the other day after seeing me ride Emerson into the park. This was it. Winter morning light, flying by, electric bite. Gator, not a hat.
Gator like the neck wrap.
Yeah. I had like a face wrap on. I was like, wow, what a pleasant way
to acknowledge that I saw someone.
Yeah. There's a haiku waiting for me when I get into
That's
work.
so nice. Wow, what a lovely friend.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. I would like to give special thanks to Ryan for Ryaning, which is a new verb whereby it describes when there is a plastic film over something and you don't realize that it's there, and then the revelation of pulling that back after someone has lived with that plastic film, assuming it is part of the thing for so long, and then, oh my goodness, that is the plastic film. The number one perpetrator has, or top ones tend to be your TV, or a really great one, the microwave. The microwave, which you're like, this microwave is crumbling and peeling away, but actually it's just the plastic film that you never removed since day one. And I'd like to think that there should be some kind of opposite day ghost version of Desire Paths of a thing you didn't even know that you needed until it was revealed to you. And it's just like, wow, it's just fresh fallen snow.
I get like abstract vicarious satisfaction based on hearing that.
You're like, wow, I'm so glad for those people who realized this.
Alex just said, I thought of him when I peeled off my oven's plastic.
Yeah, it's like when the next time that you realize that there's like a little tabby on your bathroom vent light, or on your wrapped around the side of your appliances.
There's something about that like static wrap, that peeling it off, because it comes off typically like quite well and solid,
yes.
Unless you have like the one that you've had on for 10 years on an appliance you didn't know was
right,
there.
so it comes off in little peels. But yeah, ideally the whole thing comes off in one sheet and you're like, wow. It's kind of like a snake revealing its skin after all this time.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Oh, man.
Well, we did it.
I like that. Is there any desire path that you wish were resolved in your life?
There inevitably is.
I have to mine would be, I live at the top of the hill at the bottom of which is my subway. I just wish there were like a sled and I could just book it right down. It would be, if I could make it to the subway in
a little
in
gondola.
30 seconds with like the super magic carpet,
Zip line.
escalator ramp, zip line. Exactly. That would be perfect. Just that would really make every day better.
There are like some dumb ones that I have where like when you turn from Flushing on to Sands, I believe, to get to the Manhattan Bridge, you're like, to get across the bike path, that you, no matter what, it's terrible. Like your only option is like you're gonna be crossing a lane of traffic at some point when you don't want to be.
Right.
It's there.
Yeah.
I just want like a little bridge. Just a little bridge to go over that intersection.
Yeah.
That would be a wonderful desire. It will never happen, but like that's an honest answer.
Yeah. Truly, that would be a nice idea.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get in touch with the DOT and see what they've got.
Yeah, they have their hands full. They
are very busy. They're working on keeping us alive.
I will write a strongly worded email to them. Please build an X-shaped bridge over this intersection. And they will say, "Oh, you think you're better than me?" And it won't.
And it won't happen.
Yeah.
We can dream, can't we?
Yeah, we can dream. Well, love you, mean it. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.